6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. Pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of consciousness. This is
Good morning, everyone. Conley here with the Science Nights in the Morning. We got part 2 to our last episode talking about ancient DNA. All 3 nights are assembled, and we are here. We have Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee in the studio with us, playing with his phone as always, tried and true. We have Dr. Thomas Shiller here in the house. All the way from Australia, we have Dr. Sean Graham. Kind of give us a recap, Sean. Let us kind of dwell on the past a little bit, and let's go even further back in time when talking about ancient DNA.
For those listeners who weren't around last week, didn't tune in, first of all, I think we're going to have that episode posted somewhere, so you can listen to that real quick and then listen to this one next. It'll give you a little bit more of an idea of what we're talking about, but just the briefest recap possible of last week's episode. Ancient DNA. We're getting DNA samples from skeletons of humans that go back pretty far in time, out to about some of the oldest ones, something like 50,000 years ago, during the late stages of the Pleistocene, during the last ice age. But those are the oldest samples that are going back, and we're getting the entire genome, all the genetic material from individual humans from that time period. But it's even easier to get DNA and whole genomes from younger samples. And so samples, say, all the way up to like 500 AD, right, of the Huns, people like that. So all the way up to the historic period, this ancient DNA is blowing up world history. That's the nutshell about the last episode. Not just world history, like in the literal sense of like when historical records are available. So they were available. We know a little bit about the Huns. We know a little bit about the people of the steppes before them, the Scythians, from historic records. But if you go back a little bit further in time, you lose that historical record completely. It becomes prehistoric, but it's like late prehistoric. So, 3,500 BC, about 5,500 years ago, we've got evidence for an invasion from the steppes, the great grasslands of Eurasia that formed modern Europeans, or at least contributed to the formation of modern Europeans. It was never really guessed at completely based on existing evidence. So it's totally changing our perceptions of world history and late prehistory. And that's kind of what we did last week. We talked about that, and it's incredible stuff. But we didn't scratch the surface because you can go farther back in time than, the farming people of the Middle East that spread through Europe, or the steppe horsemen, pastoralists who moved into Europe. You can go farther back than that. And it's almost like the farther back you go, the crazier it gets.
Yes, I can't wait because I'm ready for some Call of Cthulhu stuff. I want to see some really crazy stuff happen. And it's interesting because, historians, archaeologists, due to this technology that we discussed, briefly go over the technology that's kind of breaking this open, the science that is being put in place now that was only developed, in the past 20 years?
Yeah, and even like, so really there's kind of 2 big things that have happened just in the last 10 years that have made this really crazy and available. Everything's gotten cheaper, and that's a technological thing. So the more labs that use various DNA techniques and sequence DNA for various little garden variety projects, or even like undergraduate labs are doing DNA polymerase chain reaction and various experiments, more people use it, the more available it gets, the cheaper it gets. And so sequencing now is remarkably cheap. It's one of the most incredible proliferations of technology that's ever happened. Like, if you think about the Human Genome Project being completed in the year 2000, and that costing billions of dollars, and now you can sequence a human genome, from a skeleton from a burial in the steppes of Asia, and publish a paper about that, and it costs, it's like several orders of magnitude cheaper now. And the other big thing is that the contamination problem, which plagued early DNA studies and ancient DNA studies, where you were never quite sure what you were getting if you sequenced a tyrannosaur bone, right? Mm-hmm. You were getting like bacteria, or you contaminated that bone with your own DNA. That problem has largely been kind of fixed, and so contamination's not that big of a problem anymore, and it's super cheap now to get an entire genome published and to analyze an entire genome. So that's really, actually drilling out a bone and getting a sample is kind of a mechanical thing. It's not that big of a deal. Finding the bone, that's already been done, right? Like we were talking about last week, most of these bones that they're drilling cores out of to get DNA are sitting around in museums and were dug out of the ground 100 years ago. So the DNA people have kind of gone to museum people and said, hey, what do you got laying around? What kind of hypotheses can we test? And that's how this is really unfolding. There is still digging going on that's important, but a lot of this stuff is just going to old museum collections and using material that we already have.
So has this been
archaeological grunt work has already been done?
Has this been sort of a progressive process where they start with the youngest material and work their way back, or have they experimented with really, really old stuff and tried to work their way up?
It's kind of all over the place. That's great. That's a great question. It's kind of all over the place because one of the things we haven't mentioned yet, which is one of the biggest discoveries in the last 20 years, it kind of predates a lot of this craziness that we talked about last week. One of the biggest things, and it's been around for a while, is the idea that Neanderthals, right? Neanderthals have contributed some genetic material to modern humans. Mm-hmm. And that finding is pretty old. It's one of the first things they kind of looked for. What's kind of new, though, is that we've managed to, some of that early evidence of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, if you followed this story, it's kind of gone back and forth. Some of some people published this, said, yeah, we found it, and it's like 2% of modern Europeans have Neanderthal blood, right? And then somebody followed up with that and said, hell no, it's nowhere to be found. That must have been a problem or a mistake. And that was because they were using either the mitochondrial DNA, which is a much smaller piece of DNA that's found only, it's only contributed along the mother line. It goes that way. It's not the nuclear DNA. Your cells have a mitochondrial genome that's smaller, and then the nuclear genome inside the nucleus was much bigger. And at first, that's all they could get. Or they would sequence a single gene and compare that gene, and they'd find, no, we can't find that gene in modern humans, so no Neanderthal. So it's kind of going back and forth. It's very confusing. But somebody has eventually gotten the entire Neanderthal genome sequenced from a bone. In fact, I just read from the original type specimen of Neanderthal from the Neanderthal Valley in Germany, right? Wow. The one discovered in 1856. This is like the first, ancient or archaic human ever found. So they sequence the whole genome, and then they start comparing it to modern humans, and they're like, okay, this is now decisive. All modern Eurasians, everybody except for Africans, have something like 2% of Neanderthal genes in their genome.
So even sorry, go ahead.
Good. Yeah.
No. I was just going to. When you said Africans, and you said so when you said Eurasians, right? You're also including the people who migrated onto China and Japan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So all Eurasia, Australasia. Australians, and that includes everybody who left Africa basically. Okay. What looks like it happened as soon as modern humans left Africa, they ran into Neanderthals somewhere in the Middle East, and they mixed there. And then they continued populating Europe, Asia, North America, South America. So everybody except Africans has this percentage. And it's not like if you sequence the Neanderthal part of a genome of somebody from Europe and then pick somebody from Asia, you're going to get a different 2% from a bunch of different people. So a lot of mixing happened. A lot of individual cases of mixing happened. So if you were to take that all the different small percentages that everybody now has and put them together, you get something like 40% of the Neanderthal genome represented.
Mm-hmm. And
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's a lot of mixing.
Yeah, we talked in the last episode about sort of how populations, when they do meet, like we talked about the Huns, what the nature of that meeting is like, and whether it's peaceful or and when you have mixing like that, well, I guess it doesn't have to necessarily be peaceful, but it coincides with, I think maybe 5,000 years after that happened, the Neanderthals disappear from the record. So one of the hypotheses is that they were bred out, and one of the hypotheses is that they were outcompeted or knocked out by Homo sapiens.
So, all right, the keys are in the valet's hands. They're going to park our car right now. We're waiting in line. We're buying our popcorn. Our seats are getting ready. You know, the orchestra is starting to tune their instruments. We feel it. We're about to go on this journey now. We're taking the ride on the DNA train, baby. There's no coming back now. Science is changing forever, and it's changing history. So let's go on this ride.
So, Sean, okay.
And then anticlimactically, Anirban asks a simple question.
I have to. It's like, I was going to ask you, so if you had to draw a picture of a Neanderthal and a Homo sapien who existed around that time, like, what would be the major differences, like, visually?
Yeah. So the skeletally, I'm hoping that Thomas can come in and help me if I can't quite.
Will we get to that
picture.
Description on our ride back? Like
the ride's right now.
Okay,
get on the ride. We're going to describe Neanderthals. Woohoo! Here we go. So they were short and stocky people. They had the cranial capacity of a modern human, so they were not dummies. Okay. And there are good reconstructions out there, but you really shouldn't trust the reconstructions very well because those are notoriously bad. But they give you some idea of what they would have looked like. But the idea is that they were kind of shorter and stockier, which would have been kind of more tough for this kind of northern climate where they ended up in northern Europe, which was in the full on ice age when they were there. Mm-hmm. Although there's evidence, I think, that some of the there were interglacial periods where the Neanderthals actually spread north into colder climates and then retreated south. And they may not have been as cold adapted as everyone assumed. They might have been actually kind of sheltered in southern Europe during the peak glaciation. Mm-hmm. But and their cranial difference is enough that as soon as the first skull was noticed, that they were like, this doesn't look like a modern human skull. And they assumed it was some sort of an ancient human. Mm-hmm. Do you know, can you kind of list off some of the differences in like the skeletal feature or the cranial features of that? The Neanderthals?
They had more pronounced brows, more robust jaws and teeth. They had, like you said, the same cranial capacity as humans, but just shorter and more robust. So, like you said, when you look at the recreations of any of these ancient, whether it be hominin species or whatever it might be, they're always portrayed, at least like in your textbook when you're a kid, as being really ape-like, and many of the really ancient ones were, but Neanderthals were pretty darn close to Homo sapiens, aside from being just shorter and more robust.
Like when we say short, what are we talking about short?
Probably maybe a foot and a half shorter than Homo sapiens. So there would have been a noticeable...
the average was about like 5 feet, 4 feet.
I couldn't say exactly, but they were overall shorter. Yeah, and just more
and it should
robust.
Be said that like Homo sapiens at that time was probably a little bit shorter than modern humans. Modern humans are really tall. Modern Europeans are really tall because of nutrition these days. Like you look at people just 200 years ago in the U.S. or in Europe, everybody was much shorter because they just didn't get the nutrition that we get now. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying I think Neanderthals probably more like 4 feet tall, 4.5, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know either. I don't have those stats in my head. But
if you want to see some really, sorry to jump in there, some really great, offshoot subdiscipline of paleontology is paleo art. And a lot of times paleo art is really dinosaur centric. But there's a guy who I discovered a few years back. I think he's Swedish. His name is Tom Bjorklund.
Bjorklund?
Bjorklund, yeah. I think it's BJO.
O-R-K.
Yeah, Lund.
Yeah.
But he's a paleo artist, and he's really focused on recreating ancient people, going all the way back to the earliest hominins. And he has a lot of great artwork of both early Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis, but he portrays them in a really, I think, sort of practical, realistic way.
Yeah.
So if you pull them up,
I'm looking at a lot of them here, and like you say, they have a lot of the features that we have, but very flat heads. They have that dent in the forehead, but instead of the cranium kind of coming up, in a lot of these, it's very flat on the very top.
Yeah.
But they do have those real big eyes, and the eyes are very pronounced in the art. But still, I mean, it's not like you see in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Their faces are very clear.
Yeah, that's supposed to
they
be
look a lot like us.
Yeah, in 2001, I think those are supposed to be like Homo erectus or something, or maybe even an earlier hominid. Yeah, Australopithecus. Yeah. But in any case,
eyes very close together though. That's
but
for sure.
There's evidence. Sean just mentioned genetically that they couldn't have been that all that unappealing to Homo sapiens because they got it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was my key thing. Is like if you bring in an ancient human, right, Homo sapien, Homo sapien from 7,000-8,000 years ago, and a Neanderthal or something around that time, we would be. It wouldn't be very for us. We would say they are humans, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, definitely. Now, so that's one of the more mind-blowing things that's come out recently. The whole Neanderthal genome is a big deal, and the fact that we still have it still survives, even though Neanderthals went extinct, like you mentioned, and I would be shocked if modern humans had nothing to do with it. The part of the genome of Neanderthals is still present. Now, the plot thickens, right? This is one of the most incredible things that I think I've heard of in the last 20 years scientifically. And, this reminds me of an episode we did. I think we did a whole episode about Atlantis. And I kept mentioning that, one of the reasons why I don't care about Atlantis is because the actual record of things that we know about is so much more interesting.
Yeah.
And if you go back 10,000 years in Eurasia, you can't find any evidence of any civilizations going beyond, some of these early temples in modern Turkey. And then the record for anything like civilization just evaporates, and you can't go any further. But that doesn't mean there's not really interesting things out there. And here's one of them. There's a cave in southern Siberia called Denisovo Cave that the Russians have been kind of tinkering around with for 100 years, digging around in there. And there's a tiny finger bone that was discovered there that, they didn't know to whom this finger bone belonged, right? It's just a finger bone. You can't tell that much from a finger bone. There's evidence of Neanderthals from the same cave. So there's a little bit of evidence that this could have just been another Neanderthal bone. And wow, cool. That means they were really far east compared to what we would have ever thought. So that's interesting. But they sequence and they pull something like 98% of the entire genome from a single finger bone from Denisovo Cave. Wow. And they decide to analyze it, and it doesn't come out as a Neanderthal. And it doesn't come out as a modern human either. It's not a Homo sapiens. And it's like 50,000 years old, contemporary with Neanderthals, Ice Age. And to their shock, they find that this thing belongs to another ancient group of humans that we don't even have really good fossils of at all. This is a whole genome that has no real good fossil except for this stupid finger bone. And now they've actually found a few more things, a couple teeth, a jawbone now. But they call these people the Denisovans, I think they call it, Homo denisova. And they've named it, they described it as a new human. And when they compare the genome of this thing that we don't even have a complete skeleton of, that came out of nowhere, they find that some modern humans have up to 4 to 6% of Denisova genes in them.
Wow.
So this is another archaic human. We don't even have a good fossil of it, that modern humans have some of the genetic material of. So it's most common, the genetic, the people who have some of this Denisova genetic material in them to this day, it's most highly developed in Australia and New Guinea and a couple of other places in the islands, some of these scattered populations in Melanesia. And it's also in East Asians, but in a much smaller proportion. And so this just is completely nuts. There's an archaic human with no skeleton, and they were running around in Asia 50,000 years ago. We had no idea until this one tiny finger bone was collected.
Well, wow.
So when we are bringing this idea, so I'm assuming you have a lot more about ancient humans that we haven't talked about, or ancient human brothers.
Yeah, are we running up on a break?
Yes, we are running up close to a break.
I'm going to drop a bombshell on you guys after the break.
Okay.
I think I know who the Denisovans are. I know who they are.
Yes.
Tell the world after the break.
Aliens.
Atlantans.
Or angels.
Or Silurians. We do not know. The lizard people.
The lizard people. All right. I can't wait. Okay, you got to stay tuned. We'll see you after the break.
All right, we're back. We're the Science Knights. My voice is excited because I'm excited.
Really excited.
Really excited.
Really. I can see Thomas has just...
My hands are
up
in the air.
His eyebrow is slightly risen about 2 centimeters.
And he doesn't, and he looks like he cares.
He looks like he actually cares.
I care. Denisovans.
And bombshells.
Are they aliens? Go.
No. So Denisovans are right now all we have of the existence of these people is, modern people some modern people carry around part of their genome as Denisovan. And the original sample came from a finger bone, and there's a few other tiny fragmentary pieces of the fossils. Now, here's a trivia question. I think Thomas can get this one. At the time that the Denisovan were around in Asia, there were Neanderthals. Modern humans had pretty much spread throughout the area, so they're contemporary with archaic modern humans. There was another hominin out there, another Homo, that had left Africa 2 million years before any of these other dudes came around.
Wow.
2 million years. The first Homo who left Africa and colonized Asia was around when Denisova Cave had its finger bone. Who am I talking about?
That's
Homo.
Anirban knows it.
No, I don't know. I know the hobbits.
Hobbit people, the little pygmies.
We'll probably talk about the Hobbit people.
Yeah, the Hobbit people we got to talk about, and they may be part of this story as well. But it's more obvious than that, and I can't. And I was actually when I thought of this, I was like, of course, it's got to be this Homo who left Africa a long time ago, and their fossils go right up to this time and then disappear. They're gone after about 50,000 years ago. And in kind of remnant areas, they're surviving in little pockets because modern Neanderthals, humans are out there, and they're probably sweeping up the floor with them, and they're going to disappear from the fossil record. But these people these are the most successful humans of all time in terms of their occupancy of the planet. They evolved in Africa 2.5 million years ago. And they survived right up to 100,000 years ago. They were the first hominins to leave Africa. And they had stone tools. They were the first people probably who harnessed fire. They had these hand axes that they carried with them.
Homo erectus?
And Homo freaking erectus.
Wow. I knew it. I didn't have to Google it.
I'm calling it now. They're eventually going to get a Homo erectus skeleton that's got pretty good conditioned bone. Wow. They're going to drill it. They're going to pull DNA, and it's going to be the Denisova genome. Homo erectus is who was there in Denisova Cave, and they survived right to the end, and they survived today. They're still out there. They've got a mandible now for Denisovans, and holy crap, it's got huge molars, just like Homo erectus. And I'm not the first. I was pissed when I read a little bit more about this. I was like, I think I really thought of this. Nobody else did. But no, some paleoanthropologists are already talking about it. They're like, this jaw is Homo erectus-like. But nobody's going out and saying, hell yeah, this is Homo erectus, because they haven't nailed it down yet. They've just got the fragments of the Denisovans, and they've got really good skeletons of Homo erectus, but you can't get DNA from them because they're serious fossils. They're 2 million year old, mineralized fossils. But somebody's going to get a hold of a very young Homo erectus skeleton, and I guarantee you can remember this day, listening audience. Sean Graham called it. That's who they are, and that because who else could it be, right? Because there's nothing else out there, and it's like, what are the odds that there are these archaic humans running around that we've got no fossils of? Well, I think we do. We just don't have DNA from those fossils yet.
Yeah, and they had the abilities and the tools to disperse like that. And
exactly.
Even going back 2.2 million years ago, they were leaving Africa, which no other hominin had really done up to that point.
Right, they were the first. They're awesome people, and now we're moving out past what is possible with ancient DNA. We're right up on the edge of it. So we got Neanderthal, we got these Denisovans, we got modern humans, we got all the beautiful pageantry and drama of the last 10,000 years that ancient DNA is going to help to, destroy and reinterpret and retell. But once you get about 50,000 years ago, it's really hard to get DNA anymore. And so that's going to be the biggest find. You'll hear about it. It'll be in Nature and it'll be in Science. Somebody will get a young Homo erectus skeleton. And even if I'm wrong and the Denisovans are a separate group, I think it's still possible that we can get a genome from Homo erectus.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Because they really are. They were around right up until modern humans and Neanderthals were around.
And they're finding ancient hominids in East Africa all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where do they find them in? Like what are they preserved in?
Well, it's relatively recent deposits.
Really?
If you go back, not going back 2 million years, of course, but river and floodplain deposits, and a lot of them have been found in Tanzania. But even going back to the Australopithecines, they're distributed all along the east side of Africa.
Oh, okay. So the world has a way of just naturally unearthing these things as time passes.
And people too. When they find these little pockets of preserved fossils or bones, then people,
pick them up. Yeah,
start picking through them. So going all the way back to the Leakeys who were working at the Olduvai Gorge, just kind of exploded from there. So there are people actively finding stuff still, and that would be pretty badass to start finding Homo erectus stuff all over the place.
Jeez.
Yeah. And they've got the record in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, goes back all the way to 4 or 5 million years.
Yeah.
But there's also Pleistocene stuff there.
Yep.
And there's Holocene stuff. And so this one area of Ethiopia, because of the way the Rift Valley formed and the way things are eroding, you can find Homo erectus a couple of miles away from Ardipithecus, and you can find ancient modern human skulls in the same area. So it's got the entire record. It's not particularly good. A lot of it's fragmentary, but it's all there.
Yep.
And that kind of does beg the question of we're probably not going to get ancient DNA from a site like that because it's too it's scattered. There's a lot of scavengers. If you found caves in Ethiopia, maybe you'd be talking. But caves are good for ancient DNA, and that's where people should be, looking. They should be looking for really good caves that have deep deposits that go down to the Pleistocene, and you're hoping for like an ancient, an actual bone that's still got some organic material in it.
Yeah,
and that's where the focus is. But yeah, the Nisava story is incredible, and it's getting even more remarkable. But you did bring up the Hobbit people, which is probably something we should talk about.
Yeah,
because
Hobbit people.
Tell us about the Hobbit people, Anirban. Tell me the legend of the Hobbit people.
Yes.
So in the land of the Shire,
in the Third Age.
Anirban really likes Lord of the Rings. By the way.
Yes. So in the Third Age, we had people who showed up. They were called Hobbitula. But no, so hobbits were like hobbit. These are like what, ancient humans, which are like 2 to 3 feet tall, and they were found in the East Asia, I'd assume.
Just little cuties.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't follow this story too much because it doesn't seem to be like, compared to some of these other things, it seems fairly minor. But it is a really interesting story, and it's they're found on Flores Island, which is kind of smack in the middle of Indonesia.
Yeah,
the Indonesian archipelago. It's like right next to Komodo Island, right? And so, what to me, and of course, there's all these ideas that maybe these aren't really archaic humans, and there's a little bit of evidence that suggests that maybe these were like genetically. No way around saying like genetically diseased. They had like dwarfism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Or that they were malnourished. They were lacking some.
I think anthropologists are paleoanthropologists are probably going to argue about this for the next 50 years because there's a little bit of evidence going either way. It's kind of one of the things that makes it really interesting. One of the things, they're finding stone tools that are like more or less modern human stone tools in association with some of these people, which is a point against the idea that they're ancient, right? They might have just been dwarf modern humans. A lot of the people in that area on islands can be very short. Also, I mean, some of the shortest people on Earth, like pygmies and things like that. They like 4 feet tall or something like that. And that's like the average. And so if you had people that are already kind of small to begin with, and then they had a genetic deficiency that led to dwarfism, then boom, there's your fossil. But there's a little bit of evidence going either way, depending on who you talk to. I think it's entirely possible these are maybe like a Homo erectus-like population.
They're called
to these islands.
Floresiensis,
yeah. And some people have tried to classify them as like a subspecies of erectus. And so, whatever.
I wonder if anyone's tried to get DNA from them because I think they're just 50,000 years old around the same time.
They're pretty young, and I'm not sure about that. That made me. I was thinking the same thing. But I do think it's interesting that. Islands have weird effects on really quick kind of natural selection effects on populations. And island dwarfism is a known thing. It happens to a lot of mammals. And it happens a lot. It's really interesting. Some islands, or some source populations, you can have island dwarfism. And in other, you can end up with island gigantism. And it's like very bizarre which way it goes. So some things like rodents can get on islands and become really huge compared to the average for rodents. And things like elephants get on islands and they can end up really tiny compared to the average for elephants throughout history.
And
so
you see both on Flores. It's
yeah.
Right.
Other animals.
What do we see there?
Well, we see the small, tiny little elephants and these hobbit people, and then these giant rats that are like the size. Yeah. Well, compared to the hobbit people, they're like small dogs. They're like the size of dogs.
Yeah, when the Flores man was first described, I remember it was one of these big sensationalized things in National Geographic, and
Yeah.
The documentaries they were coming out with had, the little tiny Flores people chasing after
A rat.
no chasing after the little pygmy elephants.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Completely disregarding the fact that there were giant rats, like you said, like
Yeah.
2 or 3 foot long rats.
Yeah.
But also other elephants that were enormous. Stegodon is bigger than the African elephant.
Oh, wow,
elephant,
really?
Yeah.
Dang.
And giant Komodo dragons, too.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So it wasn't just tiny things on Flores. There were lots of big things,
Yeah.
lots of big scary things, too.
Yeah. That's what I think. I kind of think I buy it. I see Floresiensis, Flores man, as a Homo erectus that got to Flores Island and then became a dwarf genetically. And the way that happens often, it's like, some things can become gigantic because they find a new niche, right? If there's no cows on the island or something like that, often you'll end up with like a flightless bird that fills the niche of a cow or
Yeah,
a
those
giant
flightless
rat,
birds are on there.
right? And something that's already pretty big ends up being pretty small to kind of streamline things nutritionally because, an elephant might not be able to get the kind of calories that it's going to get on the mainland. There's just not enough food, not enough diversity of food. So it would behoove you to, if the smaller elephants might actually survive longer than a huge one. And eventually you're going to get a dwarf elephant because there's just not as much food. And I could see something like that happen with Homo erectus ending up on an island and ending up dwarf.
Yeah.
So I think that makes sense. And it's a really interesting example of that happening in humans. And I think that kind of wraps up, as far as I can tell, this interesting kind of confused history of humans from the last ice age. And it is a little confusing. I'm not sure if everybody is going to be able to follow what we just talked about. And it's changing. That's the other thing we should mention is that all this happened in the last 10 years. A lot of the knowledge about this. And so it is a moving target.
Well, what's interesting about it is that, with this new discovery of information and these tools that we're creating, right? Like they did, the stone tools were next level. I mean, that was cutting edge technology. Fire, cutting edge technology. Homo erectus, right when they start standing up a little bit, that's when this diversity just kind of exploded all across the planet. And it brings us back to us trying to figure out all the diversity and put it in a bottle and study it,
Yeah.
Well, this is such a good segue, Conley. It's almost like we planned to talk about this. How much time we got till the next break?
We have about 5 minutes until next break.
Perfect. So what you mentioned is very interesting because that is kind of the it's got the traditional view is that this is going to be this kind of progressive thing, Homo erectus, and then maybe even Neanderthals evolved from Homo erectus, and then modern humans evolved, and there's this progression in stone tools, and it's kind of this gradual thing. Now, it turns out there's this really interesting thing about Homo erectus, and we should focus on good old erectus a little bit here. For 2.5 million years, like I mentioned, very successful. They leave Africa, they occupy Eurasia, they get fire, and they get stone tools. Now, stone tools probably didn't originate with erectus. There's evidence that even Australopithecus had stone tools.
Yeah, the older
going
one.
back 2 million years.
Yeah.
And then if you imagine stone tools, we got evidence for stone tools 2 million years old, 1.8 million years old. That means that hominins could have been using bone tools and wood tools way before that, right? And they could have been lugging, nodules of chert at warthogs, 4 million years ago. We'd never know because it's a river stone. It's not shaped like anything. You wouldn't know it's an artifact, but they could have been clubbing to death things with something that they weren't working, right?
Yeah.
They could have been doing that for 2 million years before they ever worked tools enough to where it would actually be an artifact that we would recognize as such.
And
So
our closest relative outside of the hominins, the chimpanzees do that.
They use tools.
They use twigs and everything to.
Yeah,
They
and
pile up rocks.
stones, bones. Yeah.
Have you guys seen there's this incredible one they found recently. There's a small group of chimpanzees that piled up a bunch of rocks at the base of a tree, made a little mound of rocks that has zero function.
Oh yeah, like I have heard this story not just from one group of chimps, but multiple chimp groups have done this, and they kind of it's like a fetish or like a what is it?
Like a tattoo?
No, totem.
Totem.
Oh, totem.
Yeah.
They're making the
so-
monolith.
So often archaeologists have this like rule of thumb. It's like if you can't attribute any function to it, it's got to be religious.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, could
and
they
that-
be doing math?
I don't know, but it's incredible. They're piling up rocks, and it's like, if you can't attribute any function to it, it could be some reverential thing. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's nuts. And so,
awesome.
yeah, it makes sense that our closest living relatives, they're not our descendants, or they're not our ancestors. We should make clear that chimpanzees are not our ancestors. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees and other great apes, but we diverged a long time ago from that common ancestor, went a different way. But we won't get into all that stuff right now. I want to get back to Homo erectus and this idea of tools. I'm glad we talked about it. So our closest relatives had tools. Stone tools appear 1.8 million years ago. Homo erectus has this perfect hand axe called the Acheulean axe that is about 10 centimeters to 12 centimeters long. What is that, like 6-7 inches?
Yes, a little less than 6 inches. A 15 centimeter would be like 6 inches. So
So it's a pretty big honkin' flint tool that probably would not have been hafted on a spear. It wouldn't have been very aerodynamic as a thrown weapon. We don't really know how they used it, but we know that they used it. And that stone tool is some of the best evidence of Homo erectus in Africa, in Europe, and in Asia. It pops up everywhere. And these stone axes, it's one of the most recognizable stone tools out there. Like any archaeologist, if you work in North America, you've probably seen this tool. You could identify it. It's common. And this freaking thing was made by Homo erectus from like 2.5 million years ago right up until the end.
Mm-hmm.
This is the longest running human technology except for fire. Right? We invented fire around the same time and we still use it. But this stone tool, besides fire, it's it. Forget about your iPhone. It's flash in the pan.
Yeah.
Forget about cars. Forget about writing. Forget about agriculture. This thing has been around for 2 million years. The weird thing, it never changes.
Right.
It
perfect.
never changes.
It's
It never
perfect in every
changes.
way.
So how much time we got till the break?
Just enough for me to go to Morrison's True Value and buy one of those tools from the bargain bin.
Perfect. So I'm gonna. It should make you think that's very peculiar. The idea that a stone tool that is supposedly cultural baggage that has been taught to somebody would never change for 2 million years.
That's amazing.
We'll talk about what else could explain it after the break.
All right, everybody. Conley here, KVLF. We are just moving right along back in time into the paradigm shift that is ancient DNA. And when you go into Morrison's True Value or hardware store, you kind of look through that aisle and you see all these tools hanging. And there's hammers, there's the hand axe, and that kind of design really hasn't changed, according to you, Sean, for millions and millions of years.
They've got some old stuff at True Value, but I don't know if they have any Homo
They don't
erectus
have any
hand axes.
Acheulean hand axes.
No
last
old
time I
by
went there.
tools.
I mean, if
They're going to check on it for me in the back. I think.
If they have it, I would be very, very unhappy. If they had it.
So the price is 3 seashells?
Million?
3 seashells.
3 seashells for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do a good job of explaining what these hand axes look like at all. So to anybody who look at it, it looks a lot like a big fat arrowhead, right?
Oh,
Like,
okay.
It's got a sharp end and a broad, rounded bottom. And it's not as well worked as a lot of the arrowheads from modern people or spear points people find. It is worked. It's got where they've chipped an edge to make it sharp, and there's a couple of flakes that have been removed to make this thing. So it does get produced, but it's not super finely made like modern stone tools. That's kind of a oxymoron to say modern stone tools, but more modern stone tools. So this thing, it's obviously like, it looks more like an arrowhead than it looks like a river rock, right? You would, if you saw it laying on the ground, you go, holy crap, that's some sort of worked prehistoric stone tool.
Yeah, Anirban's looking at it right now.
I was looking at some of them, and a couple of them, I'm not a archaeologist. Like, for example, this I would be hard pressed to identify as an axe.
Mm-hmm.
Like Wikipedia.
And
like
the name hand axe. The name hand axe could be very well be a misnomer.
Yeah,
it's just like it's used for convenience. People don't really know what they were used for. Some people think they were hafted onto a spear, and it was a big spear point. Some people think that they were just swinging it like with their hand, and they would use it to butcher something. It's fairly crude.
Obvious.
It's neat and it's beautiful. But it's kind of what you would expect. It's the kind of stone tool that you would expect, Homo erectus to have.
Yeah,
but
it didn't change.
Yeah, it didn't change.
Yeah. We're going to get on to why it didn't change. And we were talking, Thomas was mentioning that older stone tools. There's an assemblage of stone tools you can find in Africa called the Oldowan tradition or the Oldowan culture. And there's really kind of crudely made stone tools. It's a little hard to tell that they're even stone tools at all. You have to really be a specialist to recognize the little fractures that you can make when you chip two stones together to work the stone tools that can't possibly really be made, at least probabilistically, by anything but a human hand, right? A river rock can bash into another and cut clean in half, but you're not going to have the whole margin chipped away to form these little fractures that you see. But the Acheulean stone axe is pretty, or hand axe is pretty obviously a stone tool. They made other tools that are less obvious, that are harder to identify. But if you were in, Siberia and you found this thing on the ground, you go, whoa, that's something. Yeah. Now it's really interesting though that it never changes because there's no other stone tradition on Earth really that does that. Certainly not for 2 million years.
Yeah.
If you think about North America, people who are familiar with arrowheads and spear points in North America, it starts with the Clovis points, which are really incredible, beautiful objects that are really well made. And then after that, it goes bananas for 10,000 years. The stone points that were made in Georgia weren't the same that were made in Washington State at the same time. So they're changing over time and they're changing geographically. And this happens it's nuts how quickly it happens. And this happens in Europe. It happens everywhere, but not with Homo erectus, with the Acheulean hand axe. And so I read a paper where somebody suggested that the reason why it never changes is because it was not culturally, it wasn't a cultural object. That it was genetically produced. Right? When you think about the ways you can create intricate objects in biology, there's two ways to do it. You can either do it culturally by teaching somebody and teaching, little Og how to make the stone axe, and then Gort comes along and he makes it. If you do that, it changes. There's little innovations that are created. It changes geographically, but there's one way to do it where it doesn't change very quickly or very often. And that's like a bird's nest, right?
Oh, yeah.
Bowerbirds making these incredible structures that they use to attract females, or these really incredible nests that birds build where they have to really know how to put the string a certain way, and it's completely complex, and it's not done culturally at all. It's all done through instinct, genetically programmed. And so these folks made this incredible paper where they hypothesized that Homo erectus didn't do the culture thing with stone tools. Og sat there and somehow it just came to him.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to do this. And he built this hand axe.
Oh, man.
And it was genetically programmed.
So Og was Og basically was Einstein of his time.
Yeah.
That's
Og was no, you got it wrong. He was an automaton. He was a moron, but he genetically made this hand axe.
Yeah. And then Og had this hand axe, right? And then he realizes, I can kill animals with this, and
Right.
other humans
Yeah.
too, very
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
And then
But
Peg's over there
imagine
looking
what
at
that
it
would
and
be
like,
like.
hey, that's pretty fly. Oh,
Imagine what that would be like. And Homo erectus has a smaller cranial capacity than any of the archaic humans that we talked about in this episode. Mm-hmm. They would have been. I don't know. I'm not going to call them morons, but they had a smaller cranial capacity, somewhere between Australopithecus and modern humans, about halfway along the cranial capacity scale. So they were probably really good at everything they did, but like a chimpanzee is very smart compared to other animals, and they were way smarter than chimpanzees. So they were up there. But the idea, imagine you're just sitting there on a riverbank and something overcomes you and you want to grab that rock and you can't explain it. You don't know why you're doing it, but you suddenly pound that thing into shape and make a hand axe and then go knock the hell out of a mastodon with it.
wow.
It makes sense. It fits the data better than the idea that you could have a ultra conservative culture that had stone axes that it made the same way for 2 million years. It just doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
That actually almost makes them seem even dumber, that they would have this technology and never ever do anything.
Well,
to improve
looking at it from that perspective, though, like just you thinking of it from an evolutionary standpoint or adaptation, I guess one argument to that side of things is maybe it just worked really well. What would indicate
Right.
that it? Maybe they were just you're super niche and they used it to break open bones that they found scavenging, and that was a really great source of nutrients. So they didn't have to change the model.
Well, if these things are still around and we're kind of, coming across these things on our daily walk, then wouldn't they come across them too and say, whoa, that rock's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's get that one.
Well, we have a good example, and Sean's a great example. He still has a flip phone.
Yeah.
I've moved up in the world. And
Oh, you
I
got
no
a
longer,
smartphone.
It was only when I moved to Australia it wouldn't work here, so I had to get something else. But yeah, it could be. So that's the other explanation, is that it's it's a super conservative, and that does happen. You have especially in extreme environments and desert environments, you tend, like, desert environments can't really support agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're never going to have huge civilizations unless you're next to a river valley or
Right.
something like that. So in the American Southwest, hunter-gatherers, that mode of life worked great, and it works better in the desert, honestly, than some sort of big, complicated agricultural society does. And so in some places in the desert Southwest, hunter-gatherers persisted right up until European contact.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be now the stone tools they made moved, though. They did change, and they had regional variation. So it was more conservative than the explosion of civilization that happened at, like, Chaco Canyon and the Hohokam in southern Arizona and places like that. It was more conservative than that, but still way more innovative and way more progressive than a 2 million year run where all you made was one kind of hand axe.
And they weren't staying in the same place either. They were dispersing.
Yeah, they moved to different environments and took that hand axe and never changed it. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's really
Man. So, all right, everybody. Like, when you're shopping at Walmart at 2 a.m., tell Ock, give a big shout out, high five org over there, Gorg. Or whatever.
Or
and Gort.
And Gort.
And
Oh, man. Gort is the best
I
name.
want to say that I'm making fun of these people who are, I got 2% of their genome in me, so
We all do.
I'm
yeah.
cool with it. I'm cool with it. I got license.
But so at the same time, right, when they're developing the stone axe, and I want to bring another thing into it, is the controlling the fire. So now controlling the fire human controlling the fire is also a huge step, which allows us to burn meat, which allows us to get a new source of nutrients and stuff, and also it allows us, like, we can dry the meat and, like, preserve it for a longer period of time, and
for protection, that's another one
that's
huge.
protection.
We should
one. Maybe
mention
the biggest one.
Yeah, we should mention too that there's a correlation with these innovations and the size of our cranial capacity.
Little by little
Yep.
increasing. And another thing I was going to point out is when we control fire, what happened, I personally think controlling the fire was huge, because then the nighttime we could be productive. We couldn't go out and hunt or anything like that. But inside the caves, we would be around, sitting around.
Social.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
would be in the nighttime. And
Language.
yeah. Humans.
And it's amazing how much you can get done when you're not getting ransacked by a leopard.
Yes. And
Wow.
and this is, you can also verify, me, Sean, and Thomas too, that humans require the least amount of sleep, if you think about it, because we can, on average, like, we just need 8 hours of sleep in a day, and that has been going around for like last 250,000 years now, because we have been burning wood to keep us around. But other animals typically sleep much for longer periods.
Yeah.
Right.
We invented coffee, too.
Yeah, that helped too. But yeah, no. So that is another thing that allows us, I think, to be human. Is that a bad thing to say?
And that's
No,
great.
that's-
And
yeah,
it
it's a
brings
good
us into another chapter in this series, part 3 of Ancient Humans.
And no, not just that. If you look into this, as Sean has been talking about a lot, you can see even back then how diverse we are, just like as we are now.
Yep.
We're super diverse
On a species level, too.
on a species level. So yeah.
Golly, man! One
Very
day,
cool.
one day we're gonna simulate ourselves into that time, and we're gonna get to relive it.
No.
Maybe we're
I
in
don't want
simulation
it.
now.
No. I only time I want to go back is to the point where they have anesthesia. Not up before that. I don't want to go before that.
Yeah.
Period. No.
It's all an illusion. So this brings up a lot more questions when it comes to our ancient origin. I'm sure we're going to touch base on it a little bit later, but
Yeah, I think we're going on maybe a short hiatus with the holidays coming up, but
yeah. Well, to
We'll get back
everybody
to it.
out there from all the nights, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you on another
Happy
episode.
New Year. Don't forget
New
that.
Year, Kwanzaa,
Oh, there's a
Hanukkah.
New Year.
Yeah,
oh,
there's
yeah.
New Year.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you on the next episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. You can also listen every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time at BigBenRadio.com. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K, and we'll see you next time.